Good morning, Adam Priest. It is February 16, 2023, and I have the privilege of interviewing my father, Tim Priest, for the KBA Archive Committee. All right, good morning. Can you introduce yourself for us?
I'm Tim Priest, a former practicing lawyer for about 47 years here in Knoxville.
And where are you from originally?
I'm from Huntington, Tennessee, a small town in West Tennessee.
Can you tell us a little bit about growing up there in Huntington?
Really a good town to grow up in. The school systems were good. They had a lot of good teachers and principals running it. Sports was important, especially high school football there. And fishing, hunting. It was a really good place to grow up.
How big of a town was that at the time?
About 4,000. It's maybe a little more than that now, but about 4,000. That would have been 50s and 60s.
Okay. And what brought you up to Knoxville?
University of Tennessee football coach, Doug Dickey. In the fall of '66, I was fortunate to be recruited by a number of schools, and one of them was the University of Tennessee. Doug Dickey had been there for about 3 years, and the program was really going. He was probably in his 30s, and I had met through some different channels a number of high school players from Tennessee that were coming to Tennessee. They all looked bigger and faster than I was, and I thought, I believe I'd like to play with those guys, so came here.
Was there any other, what other school would have been close in the running if you were looking at other places?
Georgia Tech, it was second, and I visited Kentucky, Vanderbilt, had a trip set to Ole Miss, but I canceled when I decided to come to Tennessee. And Purdue recruited me pretty heavy. I got a call from Bob Greasy trying to get me to go to Purdue. I was not interested in Purdue. And I was wondering if I was good enough to be a quarterback in college. But Doug Dickey had the program going at Tennessee. A lot of the players that I knew from some of the gatherings they would have for high school, like all-star teams or something, were coming here to Tennessee. And Coach Dickey just looked like the right guy for me, and turned out well.
How did you decide to go to law school?
My dad had gone to law school at University of Tennessee. The day he graduated, they bombed Pearl Harbor, and he went to the Air Force and flew a B-29. He was a B-29 pilot. He never was in combat that I know of, but he had gone to law school here. I was just trying to decide at the end of my undergraduate days. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I had in my hometown, Jerry Atkins was a young doctor that moved there when I was in high school, and we became very close friends, and I thought maybe I want to go to medical school. Soon thereafter, my oldest brother, Marshall Priest, went to medical school in Memphis, and I took the exam and they accepted me. I don't think I did particularly well on the exam, but somehow they were going to take me. And by then, you were about to come into the world. I was married, and my wife Betsy was pregnant with you. And I thought, I don't know if I want to go to Memphis and go to medical school. And I thought, well, I believe I'll try law school. That's just right across the street from where I've been going to classes, instead of trying to go to Memphis and reset my life there. So went to law school.
When you graduated from UT, where did you first work?
While I was at UT, the second year at law school and third year, or 2.5 years is what we went, I was clerking for Bill Banks and Jess Campbell and Jim Owen who had a firm here in downtown Knoxville that did general practice, but mostly personal injury cases, some products liability cases, divorce cases, and I liked what they did. And I particularly liked practicing with Jess and Jim. Bill, not quite so much, but I worked for them for a couple of years, and when I graduated, they said, come on to work here. And it was a really good place to go because I got a chance to try cases right off the bat. Not the biggest cases in the world, but I had learned from watching them try cases, and I got a chance to try them almost right off the bat.
Do you have any particular memorable cases from your time at Banks, Campbell & Owen?
I had one case, and I'm not sure I'm going to call the name of it, but it was a UT airplane crash. When I was in undergraduate school and working as in the football program as a student coach, on Friday nights, I would be one of the persons loading into one of the UT planes that was going to fly somewhere, Middle Tennessee, West Tennessee, Atlanta, places like that, recruiting and scouting players. And I got to know Charlie Lockwood, who was the pilot on all those planes. And early on, while I was at Banks and Campbell, or fairly early on, he was flying a graduate student and maybe a professor to Baltimore, Maryland on some kind of project they had. And when they took off to come back to Knoxville, the plane crashed just shortly after takeoff, and it turned out that the plane, instead of having the right kind of gas like you'd have in your car, which is what it took, they put jet fuel in it, and the engine stopped and the plane crashed, and they all died. We represented the husband of the female graduate student that was on board. They actually came to me. I'm not sure why. I was a young lawyer, but we got into that, and the case was in Baltimore, and we prosecuted it, and eventually the case is all settled.
Was that your first case of real significance?
Definitely. As a young lawyer, I felt pressure, but I was in a group of lawyers that were good lawyers and knew what they were doing. Ron Mears was one of them from Maryville. And I learned a lot of things, but I had tried a number of cases, none of that magnitude, but I had tried a number of cases before that, so I felt like I knew what I was doing.
When you were at Banks and Campbell, how did it come to pass that you wound up practicing with Bob Pryor and Frank Flynn?
Well, I knew Bob socially. They had an outfit called Tennessee Troop and Travel, which was some people that liked to get together maybe a couple of times a year and have a band and have a party. And Bob was one of the organizers, and I had met him through that and got to know him. And I knew him as a lawyer here in town. He and Sid Gilreath had a very successful plaintiff's practice just down the street from where I was practicing. And he came over one day and said, let's go to dinner or something like that. I don't remember exactly. And he said, I'm leaving Sid and I'm going with Frank Flynn, who was a domestic relations lawyer, did divorces and things like that. He said, we're looking for somebody else. We've got an extra office in our space that we've rented, and we'd like you to fill it. And I thought about it. I went home and talked to Betsy, my wife, and she was kind of nervous about it because she knew I could make a living where I was. But eventually I said, I'm going with Frank and Bob. And been here all the rest of the years I practiced.
Yeah, and that would have been about 1981. Is that about right?
That was 81. I think January 1, 82 is when I first actually started there.
Can you tell us some of what you've learned or took away from practicing with Bob over the years?
Bob is one of the smartest guys I ever knew. And he's a guy that he had done some major cases certainly before I came along to join with him. He handled medical negligence cases, serious car wreck cases, things like that, a number of different things, but really, really bright, had a sense of humor about what was going on. And he and I handled several cases early on together, and so I felt like I knew what I was doing, but when I watched him through a day-long take down an expert that was on the other side, I learned some things about how to do it and how to approach it, and he was and it was fun to work with Bob.
What about Frank? What was it like working with Frank Flynn?
Frank was there every morning at 7:45 in the office, and get the coffee going, and let's go. And he would have a steady number of clients coming in practically every day. He did domestic relations. He tried divorces. He took lots of depositions in those kinds of cases. And I was doing some of those in those days, not near as many as Frank was. But he was well respected in the community in the domestic relations law area. And Frank liked to have fun when he wasn't working too. So I thought I was two really good guys.
When you came there at the beginning with Pryor and Flynn to make Pryor, Flynn, and Priest, what did you envision, or what were your goals at that time for the firm and yourself?
Well, when you're young and you got children, how much money am I going to make is one of the things you're concerned about. It seemed like it was 40, 40, 20, with me being the 20 at the start. And as time went along, Bob would turn over multi-million-dollar cases from time to time. And so every year, at the end of the year, we would get together and rejigger who gets what. And my practice grew. I seemed to have all the cases I could handle. And I was making more money than I did when I was first few years in practice. So, getting to try cases and get more confident in how to handle cases, how to act in front of a jury, how to deal with your clients, and prepare them to testify, things of that nature. I was learning on the go.
You mentioned that you had practiced some domestic relations law in addition to your personal injury practice. Did you ever practice any in the criminal field?
I did. I tried a few criminal cases. None of them were major bank robberies, or it might be a guy that escaped from jail from the penal farm out there. I remember trying one of those. I believe it was in front of George Balaceres, and the jury found him guilty of escaping, and the judge added another year or two onto his sentence. And I tried a few more, but nothing, not a murder case or a bank robbery case or anything quite like that.
In your, before you hung it up in the domestic relations field, I remember you had an interesting story about a trial in front of Judge Swan where your client was living in a camper over on the Island Home Airport, basically. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, that was one of the last ones I did, but it was hotly contested. I'm trying to remember who the defense lawyer was, but it doesn't come to me. But it was somebody that was experienced in domestic relations cases, And my client actually was living out of a car. He had some way, he was a pilot, or he could fly. He didn't own a plane, but he could rent a plane down there. And I'm thinking, my guy must be an idiot. He's living in a car so he can fly a plane. And he didn't make a real good witness in front of Judge Swan, but we got him divorced, and I guess he kept flying after that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, he had camouflaged his wife's car or something like that, so she couldn't find it.
You reminded me, they had 2 cars, as I recall, and he had the better car, and she wanted the better car as in what was being split of the property. And he came in one day and told me that she's not going to find the car because I painted it camouflage. And I thought, I don't know if this is humorous or this guy is absolutely crazy, but a little bit of both, I guess. Yes. That's one of those things that says, you know, you've got plenty of personal injury work. Let's maybe stop doing these divorces.
Over the years at Pryor, Flynn, and Priest, then it became Pryor, Flynn, Priest, and Harbor. How did you identify John as someone to work with you?
Well, Bob knew John because he was in the firm with Sid and Bob before Bob left Sid. So he had been around John, and John had a very healthy domestic relations practice. And when you're in the personal injury business, it kind of big lick now, and maybe not another big lick for a year or two, or maybe 6 months, or maybe you get 3 in a month. That's unusual. But he could bring in a steady income to the firm and help pay the overhead. That was one thing we thought about, and we thought he was had a good reputation in the community of dealing with domestic relations cases. And so he came very early after I was here. John, it wasn't too long before John came.
Over the years, the firm grew and wound up having Don and Chris Coffey and Bob and Robbie Pryor, and then yourself and myself as 3 different fathers and sons all practicing together. Can you tell us a little bit about how that happened and what that was like? Well,
Bob and Don Coffey had lived next door to each other when they first got out of law school, while they were in law school, and then when they first got out off North Shore Drive, they lived in a modest neighborhood in modest homes and got to be friends. Don was strictly criminal defense work. The judges liked him. He knew what he was doing. He had plenty of business. And so you're always looking, if you're trying to be the business manager in a firm, you're always not just looking for personality of who's coming in, but if we've got money coming in from criminal defense, from domestic relations, from personal injury, we've got enough to feed the people that are working here, and to see that if one side is not having quite as good a year, the other side might pick you up.
And with that, with Don coming, that led to the first of the father-son tandems when Chris Coffey was a law clerk here and you hired him, is that right?
That's right, and Chris is still here, and he's had a practice that had a lot of criminal work in it, but he's had a lot of significant personal injury cases too. So he's been a really good member of the firm. Plus, he helps with the business management of the firm, and still does today.
With having the 3 different groups of fathers and sons, tell us about the dynamic of what that would do for a practice, or how the feel that it gives to it.
Well, I guess it could have potential of dad and son getting together and saying, we should be getting more of the money. We're making more, or bringing in more, or something like that. But that never happened here. But by having people in 3 different areas of practice, the benefit was you can put your heads together and try to figure out tough issues that you've got coming in your case, whatever the case might be. And you've got different people bringing in income from different areas to pay the bills. So it's been pretty good, and we've been pretty healthy financially through all these years.
We were talking some about your time with Banks, Campbell, and Owen. Can you tell us about some of your memorable judges or experiences with judges from earlier in your career?
Probably my favorite, the judges I knew best were the 3 circuit court judges, T. Edward Cole, Judge Mahood, Judge Haynes is where you tried your personal injury cases, so that's who I knew the most. I liked Judge Cole the best. I don't think he was favorable to me in some crazy way in any case, but all of them I thought were smart. They were prepared to try the cases. They let you try the case, and they were all much veterans when I started practicing. They had been, I'm sure, 8 or 10 years already on the bench, maybe 20. But I don't know that I had a favorite, but they were good people to try cases in front of. Now and then I'd have a case for trial in Kingston or Maryville or somewhere else, and you'd have to kind of get used to the judges.
You and Bob, I was going to ask you about an experience you had with Judge Cole. You and Bob Pryor had a case over gas tank issues with Chevrolet Vega, where the gas tank would explode if hit in the wrong way, and some out-of-town attorneys were defending Chevrolet, where they came in and there was some issues over whether you'd be able to share your discovery with other attorneys in other places, and Judge Cole had some words for the out-of-town attorneys, if you can remember that.
I don't know I can give the exact words, but it was something like, I know what I'm doing, and you smart alecks from the big city aren't going to push me around. I've made a decision, and that's the decision in this case. And certainly I appreciated Judge Cole doing it that way. He wasn't doing us a favor from a legal standpoint. He didn't think. He was just making the right decision on what evidence was going to come in the trial and issues like that. But Judge Cole didn't have any hair. And you knew when you were trying a case or you were arguing a motion, when the top of his head started turning red, you were getting in trouble. You didn't want that to happen.
And now that you've spent 40 some odd years in the personal injury field, looking back on it, do you feel that was the right choice for you?
Yes, definitely. I wanted to make money. That was just a side to having that, but fortunately, I attracted some significant cases, and you want to win your cases, you want to do the best you can for your clients, but it's nice to get a good paycheck now and then.
What do you remember, or what can you tell us most about the feeling or the way that it is to help a family or a person through a time of need or a very trying time like that?
Your most serious cases were cases where somebody's lost a loved one or somebody has a life-altering injury. And those things are permanent. You can never change them. But if you can be successful in settling those cases, or you can win a jury verdict in those cases, I think it brings some consolation to people, and certainly it's a financial help to them if you can get them a good settlement, or if you can convince a jury to give them a good verdict.
If you were speaking to a law student or an attorney straight out of law school, what type of advice would you give them on how to be successful in their practice?
Well, first, be honest. There sometimes are lawyers around here, not often, that are not, or they don't handle themselves well with money. But I would tell them to go to a firm that is practicing law, that from maybe you've got some experience clerking. I think it's really important in college to clerk if you can. You get a taste of what's going on in that firm, but you get a taste of what's going on in the legal community altogether. And that gives you an idea of what you might want to do when you get out. I don't know if the market's tight or not. I never went through any of that because I was clerking as soon as I was a second-year law student. But I don't know exactly how to say it, but hopefully you land at a place where you're with honest people who are smart, who have business so you can learn and you can pay the bills.
Since you started practicing in the 70s, what would you say are some of the biggest changes in the law or the way that cases are handled over that frame of time?
A lot less cases are tried to a jury verdict. That would be, I think, the number one thing I think about personal injury practice. In the late 70s, the 80s, the 90s, you were trying at least several cases a year in personal injury going to a jury. And that seems to have backed off. Mediations often settle the cases now. There weren't any mediations in the 70s and 80s that I can remember. Maybe they started in the 90s or something, around 2000. And now, if the defense, the plaintiff can't, my client can't get a mediation. The defense has got to want to do it. And if you've got a case and you've gone through depositions and discovery and the defense decides this is a case they're probably not going to win at trial, then the defense lawyer calls me up and says, hey, you want to mediate this? And that's how most cases end, most meritorious cases end these days. Not near as many jury verdicts, I don't think.
Do you have any opinion or feeling on whether that's good or bad or neutral?
Well, it's less stress for your client if it works that way. I never went to trial that a client went down there and said, boy, this is going to be fun. I'm glad I get to do this. But there were times when we couldn't get them settled, maybe didn't even get offered anything, and we got a jury verdict or a good jury verdict. They were glad they went through it, and they were glad that they handled the pressure. But and sometimes you'll get a person that's just mad at the insurance company or the defense lawyer or somebody, and they want to go to court and spank them. That happens sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't work. But I think mediations have taken some of the stress out of it, and now and then you'll hit a home run in a mediation, but not often. It's just that. It's kind of a give and take.
As your career progressed, you went through the mediation training to mediate yourself. Is that right?
I did.
Can you tell us a little bit about the difference of looking at a case as a mediator versus as an attorney?
Well, pretty early in the mediation, you're going to figure out, are the positions taken by the two sides, are they reasonable? Are they something that might happen with a jury verdict? Or are they so far out of line that we're never going to get this mediation is never going to settle the case? So I do think mediation serve a good purpose, and we've got some good mediators in our bar here. But it's good to get the case over and the client's happy about that, but it doesn't, unless you absolutely hit a home run in a mediation. I don't know that I ever did that, but sometimes you hit a grand slam with a jury.
Can you tell us, in the time that you worked up cases for a trial, what are the most important things that, maybe again like talking to a young attorney, if you have a case to try, what is the most important set of things you would do for that? Well,
of course, know your case, have your case lined up. I want the officer to be the first witness to tell how this big crash happened, and that somebody was injured at the scene, and then you work your way through the facts from your client, from witnesses. You have, seldom does a doctor come to the courthouse, but every once in a while you might have a doctor testify live, but usually it's by deposition. You're going to pay them a lot more to get them to come to the courthouse. And you kind of work your way through all of that, and you hope to end on a bang when you turn the case over to the defense to put on their case. But you just kind of get into a flow of, this is the way you try a case.
How important is the level of preparation of the client and of the witnesses to an outcome?
Oh, I think it's very important. You want to, sometimes I would take them down and let them see the courtroom, see a trial going on, and spend 10 minutes in there to see how they ask questions, where the jury sits, why is there 12 of them over there, who are these people sitting in the audience, things like that. That's not often, but every once in a while when you got a big case you might do that. But it's, I don't know, your client may be fooling you in what they demand to get their case settled, and you get in the middle of a trial and they come over at a break and offer them money, and they've been sweating bullets in there for a day or two and they want to jump at it. But usually by the time you get in trial, you're not going to settle. You're going to have a jury verdict one way or the other.
Over the course of your time in Prior Priest and Harbor, can you tell us some about, we can maybe take them one at a time, but some of the most memorable cases that you've had?
I guess the most memorable case was what we call a sudden acceleration case against Ford Motor Company, when there was a funeral over outside of Maryville. I forget what they call that part of Blount County, or it may have been just a church service, but they were coming out of a church, and there were some steps going up, and there was a group of people up here, and an elderly lady started up her car, and when she did, it took off. When she put it in drive, it accelerated. It went up the steps and it ran over those people. It killed my client's wife, and it very severely injured a lady that I represented, and there were others in it. And the idea was not to go after the lady who was in the car, but that the car had suddenly accelerated when she put it in drive and took off, and she could not get it stopped. She claimed she was hitting the brake as hard as she could. So we sued Ford Motor Company, and we fell in with a guy named Tom Murray from Sandusky, Ohio, right up on Lake Erie, who was doing some of these cases. And then with others who had Ford sudden acceleration cases. So we got the car and had possession of the car, and we hired a guy named Sam Ciro, who was an engineer that worked out of the basement of his house in Pennsylvania. I learned of Sam from Tom Murray, the lawyer in Sandusky, and he was working with him. And Sam had figured out what was happening that caused the sudden acceleration. And Ford claimed that couldn't be, that couldn't be, that couldn't be. And they kept running in experts, and they had big shot professors and so forth. And it went back and forth for years. I mean, this was like 7 or 8 years. And it went to trial. And it went to trial in Maryville in front of Judge Dale Young. And it was tried for a month. I mean, you're talking about sweating bullets when you're going every day over there and you don't know what's going to happen next. We got to the end. We had sued for punitive damage. Tom Murray was in the trial. Tom asked more questions than I did, for sure. Ron Mears was in the case, a really good lawyer from Maryville. And as we got down toward the end of the trial, we had sued for punitive damages, which is asking the court to allow the jury not just to give amount of money to compensate this injured fella or the husband of the lady that died. And so we asked for punitive damages. You almost never get that. But Judge Young ruled at the end of all the proof that he was going to allow the jury to consider giving punitive damages, and if so, how much. That scared Ford. They had not offered a nickel to any of us, to Tom's, me, or anybody else, and they came with a pot full of money. We settled it.
Another case that I recall you had that I thought was fascinating was for a young man named Rob Roberts who was camping and a tree had fallen on him, and somehow that you made that into a successful case. Can you tell us about that?
Luckily, when I got to see the tree, it was rotten. And I got an arborist or somebody that had worked for the Park Service or somebody, I can't remember. But the tree, the guy was in a camper or in a tent, I can't remember. But the tree, once you saw it, there was a section of it that was just rotten. And it was in a campground, right at the edge of a campground that was maintained by the Park Service. And so we sued them for not getting the tree cut down earlier. And after push and shove for a while, they settled the case with us.
Yeah, what made you, a lot of people would look at a case and say, well, the windstorm came through and just blew a tree down on you, and so, it's just unfortunately an act of God, it's bad luck. I mean, what made you think to take that case?
Well, all the other trees around it didn't fall. It's the only one that fell. And there had to be a reason, and it just, once you saw it was badly rotten, and it was a pretty big tree, and we thought, well, somebody should have taken care of this because they knew people were camping here every night. We took on.
You one time had a case up in Sevierville where a man came down a water slide and had a pretty significant injury at Ogle's Water Park. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, he went down a water slide, and his pubic symphysis, I think I still remember the right term, when he hit the water at the bottom, it split like that. You can imagine the pain. And it was a serious injury. And so we went over there. I said, I need to find a water park expert. And I don't remember how I found him, but a guy named Tom Ebro from Miami, Florida. I found him, and he had designed water parks around the country, or he was a consultant for the building of some water parks. And I got him up there before I ever filed a lawsuit or anything, and he saw what was happening, and you can figure out how many miles an hour by knowing the distance it is from the top to the bottom, and when they start, you hit your stopwatch, and he worked it and figured out it was ejecting them at some high speed. I don't remember how much, but way more than he thought water park standards. He had helped design water parks, and he said, that's why this happened. It's not that this guy had something wrong with his anatomy or something. He said, this is just way too fast. And we went to trial in Sevierville, and the jury gave me more money than we had sued for, which meant that we didn't get to keep it all. I think they gave him $1 million. I can't remember. And I'd sued for, I think, $750, thinking that was way more than a jury in Sevier County was going to give away. But the judge let us keep the $750, so it worked.
That was Judge Richard Vance. He probably did you a favor there on that.
I always liked Judge Vance, and I think he appreciated that I knew what I was doing after I'd tried that case in front of him.
Tim, as you sit here having recently retired, looking back on your career, how would you want people to remember you as an attorney?
He could try a good lawsuit. That would be one thing from the bar, but I don't know. There were a lot of good lawyers around. I'm not anything real special, but I knew how to try a personal injury case, and we had some cases that we got really good results on. I really appreciated the people who thought I was good enough to do it.
You spent most of your career working with Frankie Miller as your assistant. What would you say about your time with her?
She made my life a lot easier than it could have been or it was before that. She was with me for 30-something years. Smart, organized, always willing, let's go out. I need something at the courthouse. I'll get it down there. And organize my files. She was wonderful, wonderful secretary. I'd had some other secretaries, and some of them were okay, but nobody was as good as Frankie. And Frankie loved it. She liked working the cases, and she was a big part of anything that happened good to me and my clients.
Well, from me, I appreciate the time I had to work with you as well. You've been a great mentor to me, and I look forward to using the lessons that you gave me hopefully I get as many years in the job as you had.
Well, keep it up. Some days the Lord looks on you and smiles, and some days it's a little harder than that.
Very well said about the practice of law. Thank you, Tim.